Oseo.
Oseo.
Good to hear voices coming back to me. It always helps me get started. I'm rather continuing from the theme I was presenting last Sunday. We will call it the Celts here in Turtle Island or America, and keep going with that. But first, I also want to thank Mary Devine here of San Diego for sending to me through Tim Britton her remarks of she still believes in ghosts. And also, surprisingly, Grace Valentine of Dinata. Thank you for your responses. It keeps us going. And Tim Britton for putting up these Coyote talks there. A little short biography here to give a little ground for the theme that I'm doing here. Politely speaking, I had college courses in Celtic studies. That's from the Book of Kells in Ireland to the Celtic Latien and Hallstatt cultures in France and Germany, and also the Romanized Celts of Gaul, and then the Celts of Iberia. We just call them Celtarians there. So that gives a little background here. Eventually, I teamed up or ran into Professor Barry Fell, emeritus of Harvard University, who was publishing studies on the ancient writings here in America. And also a lifetime friend, associate, and so forth, Vivian Olds, who worked for the BLM in Nevada, where she's also a native. She had found these caves in the Takima Mountains in central Nevada. And I told her about Professor Fell. So amazingly, she did a whole series of drawings of these paintings I'm going to present to you in Takima Cave. And they're 8x10s, and she used color in them, and she sent the series to Professor Fell back east, and he was in Vermont. And he returned them with tentative translations. So that's relevant to this. Subsequently, I attended his classes on epigraphy. Epigraphy is the study of ancient writings, and that's where we're looking here in Turtle Island. Principally, then I learned also of the alphabets, I should call it that way, of the Celtic Ogham and the Tiffany and others. Also, I'm of Cherokee lineage and Cherokee education, so I had been previously acquainted with the Cherokee syllabary of Sequoia, whom the earlier American or English Americans dismissed as mere modifications of Roman letters. What I learned from Professor Fell, however, is that the Cherokee syllabary stems from the ancient Phoenicians, and that resonates with the rest of our Cherokee culture that has a lot of Hebrew elements in it, both in language and in custom. So that was wonderful for me. So subsequently, Mr. Fell did come here to San Diego from back east, and at the same time I continued to find sites because I could now read them. Some of these things I knew beforehand because the Cherokee intelligentsia knows of them, albeit not in the language of Ogham, but the sites themselves. And as we formed our musical group, starting the House of Ireland, the Rowan Tree, we became the Celtic Ensemble, performing elsewhere. And Shawnee Carlisle found us. So if you look here down here to Shawnee, I did a memorial, a remembrance of Shawnee there last week. Now Shawnee, you can come back to me. Shawnee is called an erudite Gaelic scholar. He is a native of the Isle of Lewis, and he identified himself as a Pict. So all that's very relevant. Eventually I got to show him these tentative translations of Takima Cave. And he recognized one of them by way of the Gaelic translation of the Ogham. And he said, that is a word that is mixed with Gaelic and Roman. And that means that whoever wrote this, which in English means dry camping place, I mean, that was it. He said, is from there, is from the border of the Highlands with England. And that would identify that this most likely is either a Pict or a Highlander who has written these Oghams in this cave. And that gives it a time frame, because that would have to be around 2,000 years ago. If you had seen, Braveheart, Mel Brooks' portrayal of William Wallace championing for Robert Bruce, the King of Scotland, sort of versus the Roman English, or the English Romans at the time. That's several hundred years later, but it is the same border we're talking about. So that's very, very interesting and very relevant here as to the knowledge of Shawnee, his recognition, and locating all this. So what we have here is this cave. It's a very long cave, and it's way up, like on top of the world, you'd say, because you can look out across the other mountains. It's very, very high up. It's a very open cave, and the whole cave is just filled with the paintings of the Ogham. Now the rocks in this cave are very, very rough, so it's not easy to paint. These are only painted, they're not engraved. And all of it is Ogham characters through the whole thing. But towards the front of it, I could recognize the rebus of Graham. You can look at the one up there. So I recognized that, and I will come to tell you about it. But with that, then I could compose the rest of the characters around it that were relevant to it. The Gaelic for dry camping place is not included in this because it's not in the same place as this. So with that. Now the deer in the Celtic culture is ubiquitous in all ways. Even part of Shawnee's name, he identified to me as having the deer stag in it. So that's all very relevant here. And all of this took place somewhere between, for me here, this study, somewhere, 30 years ago or so, I think, around there. So I'm having to recall a lot of this, and so I have some notes to go along with it. So that's the main body of my presentation here, and then I will follow it with saying what I have on display for it, and I will finish it with a wonderful poem by everybody's favorite poet, Mary Oliver. So I step aside here, and looking at this here, these are the toe prints of the deer, and they're painted on the outside of this cave, to the entrance. Again, I've tried to slightly simulate the roughness of the rock there. Whoever painted these, I suppose, with a stick, you would kind of chew the stick, to make a brush, and you'd really have to carefully paint over all of these rocks. I mean, it would mean a real chore to have to paint like that, but that is what they did. And so on the entrance into the cave are these deer hoof prints. And Shawnee has, the spirit of Shawnee has been with me, through understanding the translations for these things. All of this is called a rebus. A rebus is where you have symbols or pictures that go with the words, that the symbols or pictures are speaking. So where there's a rebus, then I can make it up with my education and the help of a Gaelic speaker, that is what I have done. So that's to let you know how I brought this about. So to begin with this deer footprints, I'm just using this to illustrate that there were a trail of these deer prints. And Shawnee, the native speaker, could see what it means, Gren an ar sam biod na fied. He said, a sunny eminence to where comes the deer. And then further, the hick ship tick, come in, go in, enter. So Shawnee is saying, that's what all of the deer here signify. Further, as we've entered in here, this inscription is not very far into the cave from the entrance, so it's a very good place to start.